So thank you for coming. There's so many options for SUNYLA. I found myself looking at the looking at the schedule over and over and changing my mind. So I appreciate that you guys chose to spend this time with us. We are going to talk a little bit about collaborating and growing OER efforts across campus. And in our case, that campus is Nassau Community College. There we go. So about us, I am Christine Faraday. I am the library chairperson and an associate professor at Nassau Community College. And I'm also the OER coordinator for our campus.
Hi, I'm Nicole. I'm a professor in the Engineering Physics Technology Department at Nassau Community College. I'm an assessment fellow, instructional designer, and ed tech specialist, and I'm also the co-chair of our advisory board for OER on our campus.
Okay, so one of the first things we just wanted to talk about is something that has really made a difference for us. So as Nicole mentioned, we are the co-chairs of our advisory board, our OER Advisory Board. So this is something that we decided to do. I know a lot of other campuses had started to do things like this as well. Ours was a little unique in that Nicole and I, this was a few years ago, I was thinking about this morning. We were at a conference, I think, at Suffolk Community College. And during the break, the two of us were sitting and talking about OER. And we started the big picture and then we kind of went small. So we said, what do we want to do with OER on campus? And like, who would help us? And we started throwing out names and Nicole was like writing them down in her little notebook. And then we were also saying, okay, but like what department should we try to get? And then when we talked about the departments, we would throw out names, but not names of like the chair people or the people, you know, for any other reason than, you know, who's in the math department, this person, and they're very nice and they're very approachable, or, you know, who I like, this person would probably be a good fit because, you know,
who's an out of a box thinker, who is going to be supportive of this.
Right, exactly. So that was really great because it allowed us to create this really wonderful advisory board that we have now. And you'll see it is very female heavy, which we didn't even realize at the time. That was just not on purpose. That was just something that did just kind of
want something done. You know who to go to.
There you go. But it's a really nice mix of people who, all of the people on here know about OER and support OER, and the majority of people were faculty who had used it or were interested in using it. But you'll also see a few other like administrative names, and those were very important when we did the big picture of like, where do we want to go with some of these ideas. It was really important then to make sure we had some of the players who would help us move forward those ideas. So like the AVP of distance ed, we had the vice co-chair of our academic senate,
our union.
Right, the IT director, like those are people that really helped us to move ideas past our little group and into the bigger spaces on campus.
But we also need to make sure that the registrar's office was represented, because we want to make sure that this shows up in banner when our students register. Our students don't necessarily know what OER material is and how to ask for it. So we need to educate the students, we need to educate the faculty, and we need to make it available when the students register. So making sure we had that component was just as important.
Yeah, and the other thing is, and maybe this is just my like short-sightedness, but you know, you do presentations for a few years on OER, you know, to us, it's not necessarily new, but I remember having our first conversations with Jessica, who was the assistant director of the registrar. Like, she didn't know what OER was. Why should she? But it was so helpful to have those conversations with her and then have her say, oh, okay, this is what we need to do. Like, once she understood what we wanted to do, her brain, her position, her enthusiasm, like she was really able to say, here's what I need to know, or here's how we could do that. And it was such a nice fit. And so that's, I think, also something important. Sorry. Garbage truck. That's also something I think that's important to remember is, you know, if you can get people from different parts of campus enthusiastic about the idea of it, then they can really fill in the missing pieces. So these are just some statistics. Nicole, I'll let you do these.
Sure. I just pulled some statistics on the OER usage, and we found out that taking a look at the departments was very important. We also found out that from the registrar's office, having every semester it either roll over by faculty member, which is very difficult because our faculty don't always know what they're teaching, was a little bit tricky, or rolling it over by course was again tricky because now you have to associate a faculty member and a course and match everything up. So by having that representation from the registrar's office in IT, we found out very quickly it's easier to change an entire course, and then ultimately we'd love a department. So we took some statistics taking a look at what departments are using them. And then obviously we can break it down by course, but by targeting certain departments, and we specifically went for certain departments first, we're able to get the word out a little bit quicker. We're able to say, hey, your students are going to start asking about this, or have you thought of? And by taking a look at where this aligns, we're also able to contact those departments and say, do you know that you have a big portion of your faculty using this? Could we maybe get the entire course on board? Or we see that you're not using this. What can we do to help you? And then we also started to take a look at faculty sustainability. And we saw that over time, the faculty were consistently returning to OER. Once you did it once, you would do it over and over again, which was great. And we've seen longevity. A couple of slides ahead.
You jumped. Hold on. Sorry. How do I go back? So sorry. This is why Nicole usually does the slides.
You want me to switch over?
Yeah, I may need you to because I don't know what just happened. Wait, okay. No, wait, I'm back. Sorry. I'm so sorry. Okay, hold on. Can we go to this one?
Sure.
Sorry, guys.
So what we found in the first year, we had about maybe 6 or 7 different faculty in different courses. And people tried it with one course, which was fine. And we recommend, just start with one course and see if it works. In the course of 4 years, we jumped up to 98 courses, which I think shows fantastic scalability, where people are saying, I have 2 of these sections, or some people are saying, I have 2 different courses. I tried it in one, it worked great. So now I'm doing it with other courses. We are pretty much across all the disciplines, from everything from the humanities to social sciences to the STEM fields to the pre-professional programs. And I think that's very important because now students can see that there's a mix. Faculty can see that it's not geared just towards one discipline. And if someone in your discipline or someone in your area is doing it, you know that you can reach out and say, I have questions. I want to learn more about it. It's not just always coming to Christine and I. And we'd love to talk to people about it, and we're going to push for it. We're not going to advocate. We're just going to flat out push for it. It's better for our students. But being able to see just how quickly we're able to scale this and across disciplines was very important to us. Our students don't necessarily know that they need to start asking for it, but that's fine. But again, you can see the sustainability where you have someone like Anna who's done this 15 different times over 4 years. That's huge. That shows that they believe in the process and they keep going. The ones that you see that only have a 1, that's because over the past year, during the middle of the pandemic, they changed over. And Christine will talk a little bit more, some of the reasons why. It's not that they don't embrace using OERs, it's just that they only started using it. And there are several reasons why. One of them being that, hey, we just went remote and the bookstore is closed and the library is a little bit difficult to get to when we first closed down. How can we start bridging that gap to help faculty and help students until everything gets up and running in a remote way? I thought it was funny when the campus closed, not that it was funny, but when the campus first closed, people in my department were just bringing everything out of their entire office. I'm like, do I have my flash drive just as a backup of my office computer? I'm good, because my students had everything. They had their lab manual, they had their workbook, they had their textbook. Everything had been given to them day 1 for free. So everything was in their possession when everything shut down. So being able to say that, hey, I had all of this material for my students they really didn't notice too much of a transition as far as course material. It was there for them. So when everything kind of went sideways, they had the same type of learning experience that they normally would. I have all of my course material in my LMS. I have access to everything, and I can reach out remotely to the library, which was fantastic. Being able to say that to other faculty and say, this is what you can give your students day one, access to all of their course materials in a digital format that they can keep, they can print, they can throw away, they can do whatever they want with, and they can help you build it out even more, personalizes the course, and it makes it a lot more equitable for students. And again, you can see just how many people we got. And again, this is over a 4-year period. And this is pretty quick to be able to pull this much material and this many faculty. So 136 courses, I should say different courses. So it's 96 courses, 136 sections in 4 years. So we ramped up very quickly. And again, you can see the sustainability of our faculty members, where they're not just doing this once. They're doing this once and saying, hey, this works. What can I build on this? And either slowly introduce more course material or just switch up a textbook. And once they do it, they stay with it. They're not going to switch back. And the students want this. They don't want them switching back either.
Okay, so gonna just talk a little bit about inclusive access, because that actually wrapped itself up in our OER efforts a great deal. And also, this is something that I know a lot of other campuses are dealing with. So just to be clear, I can only speak to the inclusive access program, obviously, that was on our campus. I'm not trying to say they're all terrible. I know some people are, they work with campus administration and with people who are the OER leads, and it sounds like they're doing it very differently. However, I can speak to how it was done on our campus and tell you a little bit more about that. So here's a brief timeline for the program. In February, there was a rumor about it. So that was just before COVID. And then obviously COVID hit and everything went haywire. And then in May, so last May, while everything was still crazy, they announced the program like over email, just sent out a thing about, oh yeah, so we're going to do this new thing called NCC Access Program, and all in an email. This is what it is. So there was a ton of problems with that. The communication with that was really terrible. So many people had never heard of that before, like of these programs before. At least I had an idea of what it was. A lot of people did not. And it was $26 per credit, excluding OER. So that's great, but that wrapped OER up into the inclusive access program in a way that was really detrimental. So in other words, if you're a faculty member, you don't really know about OER and you don't really understand what the inclusive access program is, but now you've gotten an email from the administration talking about this new program and also mentioning OER. So I had tons of emails from people who didn't know, asking me about OER, but also thinking it was somehow connected to this program through the bookstore. So that was really a mess. And then the good thing about this was that a lot of faculty members didn't like this idea of our students being forced to pay upfront for materials that they might not have intended to purchase. So they said, okay, so if I use an OER, my students won't have to get charged this amount. And I said, that's correct. So then we had to launch into explaining what an OER was, right? So in that way, it was good. But please also remember, this is during the pandemic. So people are already overwhelmed, isolated, trying to adapt their classes just to have them be completely online, and throwing, OER on top of that for people, a lot of it was too much. So they liked the idea, but after realizing the amount of work that they might have to do, a lot of people just didn't ultimately pursue it. They kind of said, like, I want to do this, but I can't handle it right now. And so anyway, so last June, July, and August, that's what I spent my whole summer doing, is trying to sort out the confusion between OER and the Inclusive Access Program.
But also look at the timeline.
Yeah.
This is May, the semester ended, and you have returning students and incoming freshmen that hear $26 per credit to just add all my textbooks in. I don't have to go to the bookstore, which was closed at the time. The library was struggling to, how do you stay open? They've transitioned to remote. Some things are open, some things aren't. We have a student population that heavily relies on our library to be able to use reserve items for textbooks access because the students can't afford it. And here we're partially cutting them off because of a situation and desperately trying to figure a workaround. And the students are told, oh, everything's bundled together and it comes into my tuition. To them, it makes sense. To a faculty member, we're looking at it going, whoa, 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 whoa. If my book was never $26 per credit, how is that helpful for my student? Or in some cases, maybe it was helpful. And those faculty members said, great, my science textbooks, my nursing textbooks, they're a lot more expensive. This works. And then from my perspective, I looked and I actually had to quiz every single one of my students and query them and say, were you charged? Because I just gave you the textbook for free. I spent my summer writing a textbook and I gave it to you for free, and now they're charging you. That's not fair. So there was a lot of trouble with this, and the students didn't understand what was going on. And also, again, June, July, August, where are the faculty? A lot of them are on vacation. They're off for the summer, and they're desperately trying to do professional development to learn how to teach properly in a remote environment. And you had, like Christine said, all the librarians going, wait. Yeah. We're taking our library and making it remote so that this is not going to be an issue for our students. We still have the ability to get information out. It's just going to be digital, or it's going to be a little bit more limited.
Yeah, it was.
We could charge the students.
It was such a mess. And then in September, this is where some of the people had already checked out in May. So maybe they just strolled back onto campus and, literally strolled back onto campus, but whatever, like got ready for, opened up their computer, ready to go for the start of the semester. And then like, oh, what's inclusive access? We all know what happened. So anyway, September was a disaster. And moving this along, because I could talk about this all day. But anyway, so by the time like the faculty just lost their minds over the inclusive access, the students a lot of them still didn't get the materials. They were being charged for things that they shouldn't have been charged for. And I'll get into a little bit more on the next slide about some of that. But anyway, so it was so bad that our administration in October had to just, they said, we give up. Like this, we didn't think this out, long term, and we're going to stop doing it for right now, which was just a godsend because it was just the worst possible timing for it. So I didn't want to completely leave this as like a super negative thing, especially if any of you have programs like this that are starting on your campus. Oh, I went too far. Stop. Oh my goodness. All right, hold on. Not again. All right, sorry. Okay, hold on. Just a second. All right. Problem with my space bar. Okay, so just very quickly, if you have an inclusive access program on your campus, like just let's learn from the disaster that was Nassau's attempt at the inclusive access program. Let's put a positive spin on it. Our issue was the poor communication and execution. Okay, they didn't talk to anybody about it. They just did it. And if your campus is anything like ours, I mean, faculty do not like it when you just tell them what to do. Like their input was not asked for. There was nothing. It was just, this is what you're doing, and that never flies. They had no comprehension of how heavily the students relied on our reserve collection. So you're talking about saving students money, but they didn't save the students money because the students never bought the textbooks. They used the library's copy. And this is not a random image that I searched on the internet. If you look closely, you could probably see the Nassau stamps on the side, but these are actual reserve textbooks at the end of the semester. I mean, they are used and photocopied and scanned until they're in pieces. Our students are not students that have disposable income. So this idea of, saving them money by charging them per credit is really asinine. There was that confusion over how OERs were connected to the bookstore and also communicated to the bookstore, because all of a sudden the bookstore now had this list of what courses were OER, but no one set up the workflow on campus to say, hey, you know, Christine's the OER coordinator. She can give you the list. Or if, you know, Nicole says, oh, my class is an OER, does she tell me or does she tell the bookstore? Like there was nobody thought of the workflow for how.
I got an email from the bookstore that said, we found a textbook for your course.
Right.
I said, thank you. So did I, but I'm not using yours. But we're charging your students a digital version. Really? I'm giving it out for free to anybody who wants it. So it was very poorly communicated, and the faculty weren't educated on it either. And this really was a great way in hindsight for us to be able to scale up OER to say, we don't have to do this for your students. There's a better way of getting course material to them.
Yeah. So also in terms of billing, registrar, financial aid, none of that had been thought out. So those are all the things which, if it hadn't been rushed out in the middle of the pandemic, you know, if they had taken it to the academic senate, for instance, like our academic senate, their students, you know, all the faculty representation, administration, registrar, you know, financially, everybody's there. So ideally, then we would have figured out all those issues ahead of time. So yeah, if this is ever going to work again on our campus, that's what would have to happen. And I would assume on other people's campuses as well. Okay, so, right. So just to, you know, if it comes back on our campus, because they didn't say it's never going to come back again, they just pulled the plug, is the problem with it too, is that the reserve textbook in the library, we can't continue that collection. So access is going to be a continual problem, right? And then, so that's going to get wrapped up into this. And they really missed the mark with not going through campus governance. So if this ever comes back around, that would definitely be the correct way to try to get this as some sort of successful program on campus. And also making it really clear to the students how to opt out, because legally they have to be allowed to opt out, but they don't make that easy and they don't make that common knowledge. And that's just unfair and sneaky. And obviously more OER. So, you know, if this does come back around, OER has to be a huge part of it, but done in a better way than just throwing out the words OER in a giant email for people to kind of try to figure out. All right, so I'm going to hit the space again, and what's going to happen is going to go forward like 9 times. Okay, I'm stopping. Okay, so this is just a little bit of talking more about assessment. So we did a little bit of really small scale assessment, some pre and post assessment of 3 research courses a few years ago, and there were positive reviews of the text, the students' feedback. They loved, obviously, that it was free and they could access it super easily anywhere with, you know, a computer or Wi-Fi connection. The faculty, the 3 different faculty members that used the same text, they thought it was good and very comparable to the paid textbook, published textbook that they had been using in previous years. And they also noted that it was way easier to update, because something with, you know, research methods, that changes all the time. So people don't think about that, but it really does. And so they were thrilled that, you know, just even really simple things, they could update on their own, and they didn't have to wait, you know, a year for another version to be published.
And you can customize it.
Right. So, because especially with research, if you run any kind of research courses on your campus, I mean, you know how annoying it is when research, you know, any kind of research, and it mentions either databases you don't have or systems you don't have. And, you know, it's so much nicer when you can tinker with it and make sure that it reflects what's actually in your library's collection. So this really small test run assessment, one of the best things that came out of this was like anecdotal kind of evidence or notes. And one of them was the fact that the faculty, when we talked about like assessing the use of the OER in a real classroom, faculty were like nervous about assessing OER because they were concerned that it was going to be more of an assessment of them and their teaching, and not necessarily of the course material. And so that was something that was unexpected. So it was a good thing that we learned ahead of time before we did any kind of large assessment. So I thought that was a valuable kind of piece of information.
But also bringing the information back to faculty across campus and reminding them that OER is the same, if not better, than the textbook manufacturers. There's a question in the chat. Do faculty appreciate the commercial publishers' online homework systems and multimedia ancillaries? Absolutely. Yes, they love being able to hold on desperately to those textbook manufacturers, all of their ancillaries and all of their assessment. And I can speak from personal note, it is not that easy to start creating all of these quizzes and tests and creating these test banks in our LMS, especially when you're dealing with a lot of complicated formulas and diagrams. It's tricky. It takes a lot of time and effort. A lot of people are encountering that, and there are easy workarounds because you don't have to use your LMS to assess students. You can think outside the box. I think this last year really helped faculty do that, to be able to look towards other technologies. So rather than stop my course and have them take a quiz at the end of class or during the week in Blackboard that took me 2 hours to create, and I'm pretty quick, and 15 minutes for them to take, I can now turn to something like Edpuzzle. And in the middle of class, okay, now that we learned the information, let's just do a quick little, do you get the information before we move on? And being able to do smaller assessments and chunk the information has been great for the students to learn. And I think it's really changed how we look at teaching and how we look at assessing by using different forms of technology to break down the information. And the students are so overwhelmed right now. But being able to take smaller bits of information, they retain it better rather than saying, we're going to take the exact old school way that we've taught you pre-pandemic and now put it in a different format in Zoom. It's the exact same way you learned. No, because they're in a different situation. They're in a different learning environment. If you're using OER material, you really need to embrace all aspects of it. It's not just about the textbook. It's about course material. It's about ancillaries. It's about how you assess things. It's about using different forms of technology and sharing out the information for best practices. Not any one of us are the keeper of all knowledge for that area and that discipline. Being able to share it out. And again, that's the whole point of OER. Sharing what we learned is really helpful for everybody kind of working together.
Also, people do love those ancillaries. I mean, let's just be honest, they totally do. But more and more people are recognizing that. And so a lot more OERs now have ancillaries. So if people do mention that, that's something you can look for and search for, because they do exist. More and more people are providing those, realizing that that's really something that's valuable. And then the other thing I would say is, you know, it's easy to make that part of your classwork. A lot of the nursing faculty will have the students create study questions, right? Like if you were going to give a test on this chapter, like what questions would you ask? Or if you were going to make a review sheet for this, what would you have on the review sheet? And so they kind of make that part of their course. And sometimes the students, you know, work at something that's really good that they keep and they move it forward for the next, you know, the next semester. And it's valuable for the students because it's work, but it's also helping them to process the material. So that is also something that, depending on your course, that people do find valuable. And the other thing to remind them of too, like Nicole said, is instead of using the same assignments over and over, if you want to help prevent plagiarism, it's also good, you have to switch up those assignments. You know, that's how students, you do the same things over and over, and that's a guaranteed way that, you know, that you start to get plagiarism in your courses. So that's kind of a simple way to avoid that is mix it up, even if it's, you know, mixing up either the types of assignments or the, you know, the questions, the review, all of that is valuable for that reason as well.
So I took a look at a white paper from Cengage. And just taking a look at where the OER primary and supplemental market size tends to be, you can see that it's very heavily centered in the history and the STEM areas, which I thought was interesting because the STEM areas predominantly, in my opinion, people like to hang on to their ancillary material, like very, very forceful about not giving it up. And the STEM area is something that constantly changes, and it's very difficult to either keep up with the newer research, or you'll see that, especially in the physics area, the science isn't changing. It's just one or two questions are changing, and the students are constantly being forced to use newer textbooks where you don't have a lot of updated info. So it's a mixed bag, but they will hold on to their ancillaries, where you don't get as much in maybe the English areas or the psychology or the humanities. So we figured those are the areas we should target first. The people who have textbooks that don't change as often, or people who are going to embrace because they don't hang on to their supplemental material as much. And we did find that a lot of the faculty don't want to change because, you know, they've been using those ancillary materials for so long. How do you get them to go about changing? It's not about going about changing. It's not about the faculty giving up what they have. It's having them realize it's a newer learning environment for students. And again, I'm not just talking about the pandemic. I'm just talking about this. We're midway through 2021. We're in a new learning environment, and we need to keep up with how the students learn best. They are very digitally oriented. They're very mobile technology oriented. They want to learn in a different format, and handing them a heavy textbook and saying, read this, and now go online and do the information. It's information overload for them. They want to be able to chunk out the information and scaffold it. So by going to the departments that are a little bit more open-ended to say, hey, you have a lot of different ways of assessing students. You have your supplemental material and you have your traditional material. Can we use you as a test case? Could we switch over to you because you are a little bit more flexible? It was very easy for us, as opposed to some of the departments that didn't want to change over. I mean, when we look at the STEM areas, I targeted faculty that I knew would be able to change over. I lucked out that I had a textbook that went out of print, and I was so excited because I said, this is the perfect opportunity to go with an OER and take a look at how I change. I went to faculty that I know that they are not happy with their textbook and say, hey, this is an opportunity to change, building something from the ground up that helps today's learner. I'm just looking at in the chat.
Yeah. As I say, I don't know if you caught the one question asking about the platform changes. I know we've talked quite a bit about, it was a question from Rebecca.
Yeah, I'm just going back to that. With the platform changes, well, very simple. Not all departments with what's going on financially are staying with a lot of these platforms. So if departments are giving up those platforms because of financial reasons, then the faculty really have to come up with something else. It's either create it yourself or reach out to other communities of faculty to help come up with new OER material. Being able to customize it helps. They liked it not from the aspect, and I only know this personally because I've talked to these faculty and why they're so resistant of giving up their textbook manufacturers. What is it that they're holding on to? And it's really the assessment, because they can do very quick assessment with the students. But is it giving them feedback? And is it giving them feedback based on the textbook or based on what you're teaching? And once they realize that, wait a minute, you're giving feedback on what it is that the students are learning based on your course material, not somebody who wrote the textbook, they're realizing that there's a disconnect. And you either have to figure out how to customize it very quickly, in which case you're spending the hours going back and customizing it, or come up with a new platform where you're customizing it from day one. So to say, I have to change a textbook and I have to change my assessment all at the same time, or I can do it piecemeal. Which is easier? Are you going to keep fixing something that's broken, or are you going to go back and customize something that you're building out all at once? And I think that was a really good takeaway for a lot of people to realize that there's a disconnect, and you're teaching to a textbook. Unless you wrote the textbook, that's not necessarily helping the students. I'm just looking, Hillary asked, the OER, is the faculty using more textbooks or other OERs? For the most part, I'd have to say in the sciences, they're using the textbook.
Yeah, I'd say overall, most people are using a textbook, with the exception of courses like English. They're using more ancillary materials because that just makes sense for them. But more things are coming out in the field of, in English. And so I think that's helpful. But overall, I'd say most people found a textbook or are kind of blending a textbook that they found and maybe materials that they have and are kind of using both of those things.
I know that I happen to use in the STEM areas, I use both the textbook and I use smaller material. So I'm able to give them the entire textbook, and then every different module they're doing for the course, I have a smaller portion. So they have the overall textbook for the chapter, and then smaller little chunked out information of things they need to be aware of, and quick little hints and tutorials and definitions and diagrams and formulas. So they almost have their little cheat sheet right in with their course material. So it's broken out. And just by talking to faculty, you realize whether they're happy with their textbooks or not. I mean, some people are diehard, I love my textbook, I'm never going to change. And other people are like, I don't care. I don't love it, I don't hate it. Those are the people you want to get to. If you're not tied to it and you have the ability to change it, certainly go back and relook at your course.
Yeah. So this is some of the kind of future research. So things we're learning as we go along and areas we kind of want to explore more. Analysis of student persistence and retention within courses using OER material, that we really want to tackle. And we know that that's the big data that can really help us with institutional support. Especially in, with everything going on budget-wise these days, because the thing that we really need to make sure that we make clear to the administration is that when you're saving students money on things like, all these course materials, they're much more likely to enroll in more classes. If you're telling them up front that they are not going to have these course material fees, right, associated with all these different courses, like hundreds of dollars of textbook fees, that is something they're more likely to then say, oh, well, I could afford to do this other course then right now. So something that seems maybe not so mind-blowing, but even something like that to the administration when enrollment is down or when they are really looking to save money, those are things that would really help, and we really want, but we know we need the data. Like, we can't just say that. I just said it to you, obviously, but like, I can't just say that to our president and expect him to say like, yeah, what do you need? I'll give you whatever you need. So we know we need the data. So we need to figure out the best way to assess this, show it to them with numbers, and then present it to them, and then hopefully get the support that we really need. We did go to our Office of institutional assessment and stuff. The official title eludes me, but we asked them, we said, okay, here are the OER courses from since 2017. What can you tell us? Like, are there any measurable differences? And they said there wasn't. So that's actually a good thing, and it falls in line with national data. So it seems insignificant, but it's not. It's a good thing. So in other words, using OER instead of the traditional textbooks, there's no measurable difference in the grades. That's a good thing. That means it wasn't like it was such lesser material that the students didn't do as well. That shows you it's comparable to what you were using before. So that's not a concern, in other words. So even though that wasn't data that was measurable, it still told us something valuable, right?
It also shows those faculty who don't want to give up their old textbook material with the ancillaries. There's always that mindset that OERs are lesser material. And I don't know where that came from, because this is being vetted by other faculty. And if you don't like it, then just don't use it. Or if you don't like it, go back and change it. That's the whole point of OER. You can add to it, you can change it, and you can keep disseminating it. So being able to show that our students that use OER don't learn any better means that we're not doing things any better than somebody else. We're doing things differently. And we're just trying to give students more options for how they can learn and take ownership of their learning.
Yeah. Yes, so also continued measurement of scalability. We want to keep measuring of goals for OER sustainability. We know we need to provide materials that can better meet accessibility requirements. You know, we're all doing that across SUNY right now. And that is also something that we need to make sure we educate people about on our campus is, hey, you know, everything's going on with EIT right now. Think about the fact that because you can customize OER, this is the opportunity to make sure it really is accessible. And if it's not, how can we make it accessible? So that is something that I think could really be an important thing to leverage moving forward across SUNY, not just our campus. Provide materials that can be localized. I mean, you guys know this, but just even like history or something like that, like the ability to customize those materials to make it relevant to the students in your class is an amazing thing. Increase student engagement with the course materials, materials on the first day of class, and make textbooks more affordable. Not hitting the space bar for a minute because this is how it fools me. Just gonna wait a second. All right, I'm going for it. I'm gonna try again.
Right, he'll be fine.
Voice. Okay, hold on. This thing hates me.
And now doesn't want to go.
Okay. All right. So here's something I hope you guys are going to like. So basically, one of the major things or problems that we kind of had and that we tackled as an advisory board was the fact that a lot of faculty members did not know what OER meant. And then when they did, you know, our campus had specific requirements as a SUNY as to what meant, like if you're an official OER course and you can be put into SUNY as an official OER course, what does that mean, right? The 51% of your materials. But how do you explain that, right, to faculty quickly and efficiently? A lot of faculty were telling me they were using OER and that their course was OER, and it wasn't. And it wasn't that they were trying to fool me, it's just that they really didn't have a good grasp at what OER meant. And then faculty were talking to each other, and some of them meant well, but were, you know, relaying the incorrect information about OERs, right? So this was a big problem. Then I had my stats were off, right, when people were reporting to me. And also it was just, it was a mess. It was causing all sorts of problems. So we wanted to make a tool, right, some kind of easy tool to help our faculty where we could say, here's something that's going to help you figure out whether or not you're using OER. But more than that, it's going to like teach you a little bit about OER as you're doing this very quick thing. And more than that, we wanted to make sure it was something that we could share out, because we knew from talking to other SUNY campuses that we were not the only ones having this problem. I think we had some of the most hilarious instances of people thinking they were using OER when they were not, which I'm not going to get into here, but privately, I would love to tell you those stories. However, I know other people had this problem too. So it was like, oh, if we could create something that would be useful in this way, then we could definitely share it out. So keep in mind, I'm going to open it up, but keep in mind, like a lot of the questions are very specific to Nassau and the things that our registrar told us they needed and the things that fit for our campus. But that's why, it can be changed so that other people could.
It's a great way to get information and data, but at the same time, educate the faculty.
Why can't you open that? Hold on. I sent this to you before, so I know that it works. Where did you go?
I am just going to pop in for a second to say we are technically at time. The keynote and lunch does start at noon, and I'm moderating, so I am going to have to pop out a few minutes prior, but feel free to continue.
Great, okay.
So I just wanted to give that time check.
All right, thank you. All right, why are you not coming up? Nicole, I sent this to you and that it worked.
It did. Grab it from the chat.
Hold on.
I could just answer a question while you're doing that. There's a question that, do faculty need to write their own material? Absolutely not.
No.
There's so much information out there. You can certainly write your own if you want to, or you can grab that from so many different resources online and then customize it and use what you need to tailor to your courses. Where do you find the resources? Very easy. Turn to your librarians. That's what we advocate on our campus, that if you can find it on your own, if not, the librarians are there to help find just about anything OER related.
Okay, can you guys see it now, Nicole?
Yes.
Okay. All right, I'm going to put it in the chat because I did not realize we were so close to time, and I want to make sure everybody can look at it on their own, because we definitely won't have time to go through the whole thing. All right, so basically, very quickly, there's a Creative Commons on it. We originally did it in LibWizard, but you can, take out the questions a little, whatever, labor intensive, but still you could put it into like, Google or something else if you needed to. So just need to get onto the question. So the name of course, CRN, name of department. Okay, let's get to that. Okay, so here's the ones that I thought would really be useful for everybody here. Does your course use materials that have any Creative Commons license? So if you said yes, when you hit next, it says, yay, if the materials fall into this category, it's probably considered OER. It can be free and legally distributed, redistributed. Please continue to the next question. So what we thought was different about this is as you're answering the questions, it's reacting to it so that it's helping, it's not just grading it or saying it at the end, telling them yes or no, it's telling them as they go. So hopefully they're starting to get a better idea of what we're talking about when we talk about OER. So if they had said no, it says, if the materials do not fall into this category, it might not be considered open, right? And then we always throw in the little, just talk to us. Basically, here's the email address. You can talk to us about this because, there's always specific things that are sometimes tricky and don't fall into one of these categories. All right, copyright statuses. Does your course use materials that have anything in the public domain? Again, there's a yay or there's the no. Does your course use materials with GNU or MIT? Okay, let's say not sure. And then again, so it's helping to just kind of give a little more information. What sort of materials are you using? Okay, so let's say you're using open textbook. You have to list the material. Okay. So if you're using, let's say, fiction books through Overdrive, so it says, we love that you're using library material, hint, hint. However, technically it's not free, even though it's free for your students. So this is always a big bone of contention on our campus. And I'm sorry that I'm kind of rushing this part because we're close to time. But as you know, that's a huge misconception because people think OER means free. And people who do not live in the library world think library materials are free just because they're not giving you the money, right? So this is also one of the reasons I think our faculty had such a hard time really comprehending what we meant by OER, because we're really hung up on that free element, right? So, and also, of course, being librarians, we want to encourage them to use library materials. So we certainly don't want them to think we're pushing OER and saying, no library stuff, just use OER, right? So this is where that 51% really came into play. And this tool really helped us to remind people about that you could still use a ton of library resources. It's just that 51% of the course materials would have to be OER.
Again, you're not changing everything all at once.
Right. And then this is just the little end part. So it's not oversimplifying, but it's definitely simplifying all of these things. But the idea is that you don't want to make it a big pain for your faculty to do this cute little quiz. You're just trying to make it easier for them to answer the questions. Then Nicole and I get a copy of the answers in our email. And then it helps us to go oh man, this person's going to be a problem. We got to call them right away and talk to them because they seem very confused. Or oh, hey, so-and-so is interested, let's follow up with them. So really, I think this has been a really useful tool. It's still a work in progress. So please take the link, play around with it. If you have questions, email me, and I'm sure you could think of things that could be done better in it, and do those things, please, and let me know, so I can also do those things. But it's something that I hope will help people, because God knows we needed it badly.
There's a question in the chat about which Spring Share function did you use?
LibWizard is what we made the actual quiz in, and then just to make it a little bit easier to have people access it, and to make sure I could put the Creative Commons license on it, I embedded the LibWizard tool, the survey, into the LibGuide. So that just made it a little bit easier to share with people. But you could take all the individual questions and put them in a different software, or into Google or something like that. But I couldn't find anything that would work better for our campus than this, since we already have SpringShare, and it already had all these kinds of cool functions that let me do like responses based on the multiple choice. And that was something we really wanted.
It was great because by us both getting the email, now we know who to reach out to. Now we can go back and educate faculty. And we also have the option to say, here's more information, or Christine can turn around and maybe tailor more information for faculty to say, this is something you may check out for OER that might help you. Or I could turn around and say, well, you know what, I know so-and-so was doing this as well. Why don't you connect with them and maybe share the process?
Okay, and then I think we're on at the very end here. Yeah, so we'll wrap up, but basically in terms of incentives, certifications or badges are a big thing now through Blackboard, and that's definitely a cool thing where you can tell your faculty, this is something that you could have through using OER. Use OER as a part of performance review or appraisal. Work with your school, your department to make OER part of release time or sabbaticals. We've had a really high rate of success on our campus with faculty going out on sabbatical to develop OER. So that, is definitely something that is an incentive for our faculty once they hear that.
And help to scale up pretty quickly.
Yeah. The public acknowledgement, obviously we didn't do it this last year, but we normally do like a little breakfast in April where we acknowledge all the people who've done OER. We have a little presentation, we have a breakfast, we give them a little award, and we take pictures with them, and then we write it up. And it's a nice small thing, but we invite the departments that had OER. And it's a small thing, but something that, that I think really means a lot to the faculty.
We also couple it with a workshop on OER. So now that you're publicly acknowledging the faculty that use it, we're also inviting other faculty to learn about it.
Right. So, especially for the departments where maybe their faculty member is the only person in that department who's doing OER, we invite the department, and anybody else who comes is going to see like, wow, look at all the praise my colleague is getting for doing OER, and they're learning a little bit more about it. Stipends, we're not offering financial incentives right now. That was a bit of a bear to work out because of we had union issues, and we had some other issues with that. We did eventually work it out, but since we haven't been on campus, we haven't actually paid anybody out since COVID. But as you guys all know, there's, at some point the grant money is going to run out. So there's a lot of debate as to, is that kind of the best way to do this? Do we want to push the money at people to do it? Not push, but, do we want to use the money as the incentive right now while we have it? Or do we want to try to get people in by using different ways to motivate them and use the money in other ways to support OER? So I think that's a really worthwhile discussion that we do not have time for today, but definitely something that we talk about all the time on our campus. And I think that's really it. And we have 5 minutes, right? If anybody has questions that we didn't get to, I'm going to stop sharing so I can see you lovely people.
Anybody have any additional questions?
Oh yeah, the breakfast idea, Hillary, it really is good. And it's not as expensive as you would think it would be. Like we used some of the grant money. We had our on-campus catering do it, because that's always cheaper. And we actually set up a space in the library. So we didn't even have to try to get a bigger space on campus. We have like a smaller space and we set up tables and a little presentation thing. And it's great. And you can invite the administration. And so it's really effective. And we do it every April because it's not that busy in April, but May is crazy.
It's nice. It's informal. Everyone's able to talk to each other about OERs. You have the library staff right there who can sit down and say, hey, we have computers here. Let's sit down and look up something in your discipline to help you out. So you can have those conversations right there instead of trying to grab people on the fly during finals. You know, here the information is right here for you. And I like that it's in the library because it really sets a tone for this is where all the information is housed on campus anyway.
Yeah. And we did, when we have the space, we'll do an OER exhibit on the way to the breakfast. So in the library, since we have control of that, and then it's just like another added thing that you can have when people come to the breakfast, they can see like, oh, look at all of this. So yeah, so that's another thing. If you have any exhibit space in your library, that's a good one.
Any other questions?
No? Oh, thanks, Hillary. Yeah, please feel free to email me if anybody has any follow-up questions, and we'd be happy to answer them. Obviously, it doesn't have to be me. It could be Nicole, either of us. Our email was on that last slide, but in case you needed it, it's just our names at, Christine.Faraday@ncc.edu or Nicole.Simon@ncc.edu.
Sure, I'll put them in the chat for you.
Nicole types faster than I do. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for taking the time this morning.